First, I will again welcome you all to this webinar jointly organized by the GCSP. I'm Marc Finot, the head of arms proliferation at the GCSP, and we work with our partner MITO, Middle East Treaty Organization, represented here, among others, by its director, Paul Ingram, who will moderate this webinar. In this webinar, as I said, we will talk about the current issue, which is the efforts of the international community to revert to full compliance with the JCPOA by all its parties, and including the United States, because the Biden administration has promised to rejoin the agreement. And obviously we'll look at impacts on regional security, global security, in particular the prospect of a WMD-free zone. And we will also, of course, look in particular at the role of the remaining parties in the JCPOA.
Thank you, Mark. Finally, I want to turn to Dina Esfandiary, but before I do, let me just remind you of the Q&A function to ask your questions, which we will be passing to after Dina's contribution. Dina is Senior Advisor to the International Crisis Group and has been working in the region for many years. She'll be giving a perspective that is relevant to the Iranian calculations. Dina, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you very much to everyone for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be amongst you all. So as Paul said, I was asked to speak a little bit about the Iranian perspective on the JCPOA process, the talks, and the way everything is going at the moment. So I'll start off by saying, I think it goes without saying that there's a great deal of frustration in Tehran at the moment. There was frustration, obviously, with the Trump administration. Now there's frustration with the Biden administration for the slow pace of return to the JCPOA. The Iranians thought it would go a lot faster. There's also disbelief at where they're at. After many, many years of negotiations, the compromises that they made, their implementation of the deal, there's serious nuclear fatigue in Iran, and the idea that they're still stuck in this weird time loop where they're still talking about their nuclear program rather than addressing some of the more pressing concerns that they have in Iran domestically at the moment is something that many Iranian officials still struggle to grapple with. So there really is frustration with that. From their perspective, and this is a bit of a generalization because I'll go a little bit into the differences within the Iranian political system afterwards, but from their perspective, there is no scope for any dialogue on anything else until there is first a return to the JCPOA as is. That's the number one cardinal rule. You're not going to get dialogue on regional security. You're not going to get dialogue on the missile program. You're not going to get dialogue on an expanded nuclear program, not until all the parties return to the JCPOA as is first. But I think there is an understanding in Tehran that this JCPOA is no longer enough for a lot of the international community. The knowledge that Iran has amassed over the course of the last couple of years, where it's continued with its nuclear program, poses a problem to the rest of the international community, and Iranians are aware of that. And this administration has expressed some willingness to perhaps discuss aspects, or let's say problematic aspects of the nuclear deal once there has been a return to this deal first, and everybody's returned to compliance here. There has even been some talks of a willingness to talk about certain very limited aspects of Iran's missile program, and of course have a dialogue on regional security, although I firmly believe, after discussions with both sides of the Persian Gulf, that a dialogue on regional security should not be held in the P5+1 process, but rather in the region facilitated by regional actors, perhaps with the blessing of other international actors who could bring these regional actors together. But that would also mean that it would be taken out of the JCPOA process and could be conducted on a parallel stream. And there is a willingness to do that in Tehran. But like I said, the JCPOA is the starting block. There's no point in contemplating anything else until everybody comes back to the JCPOA first. There are divisions in Iran, as everyone knows all too well. Much like the US political system, the Iranian political system somewhat mirrors that in terms of the hardliners and the reformist/moderates and their desires for openness and willingness to talk about the JCPOA, but also other issues with other international actors. And I say other international actors because I don't put Russia and China in that perspective, because I think generally across the political spectrum, despite reservations, despite some suspicions, Iranians are very much willing to engage with the Russians and the Chinese, no matter what happens. So you have these divisions. You have traditionally, Iranian hardliners have been anti-dialogue or anti-negotiations and anti-deal. Again, this is a gross generalization because there are no monolith, and even within the hardliners, there are different perspectives on how to conduct these negotiations and whether to return into compliance with the deal. But generally, it is a group that has never been really very open to dialogue with the West in particular. I think today some parts of that is changing a little bit. And the reason for that is because many people inside Iran have seen the benefits, not economically, not in terms of openness, but the political benefits of being a state that is in compliance with a deal that they compromised on and came to an agreement with, while the other side walked away from the deal. So for once, the Islamic Republic is not the bad guy. They were the ones who were implementing it. This has gotten them a little bit more political attention. Some of that has once again gone back down over the course of the last 2 years as Iran continued with its nuclear program. But again, it was a very new sentiment in Tehran to be the state that wasn't the bad state, that wasn't the one that broke the deal. So today there's a debate in Iran about whether it is worthwhile engaging in this dialogue to come to a roadmap to then re-enter the nuclear deal, which is a very long way of coming back to the deal, before or after the Iranian elections, which happen in the early summer with the inauguration of the president in August. And I think I think there is no consensus right now in Tehran. I don't think they've made up their mind. From the supreme leader's perspective, there is, on the one hand, it makes sense to allow the Rouhani administration to continue to carry this forward, not least of all because if the process fails, then he's got a scapegoat. He can blame it on them. They failed. They ruined this entire engagement experiment. Now we're going to come with a new president in August, and we'll start from scratch and forget, engagement with the West. The other side of that is also that because these hardliners have seen the political wins that Iranians have gotten as a result of engagement and as a result of being the good guys, there is also a desire, even in their camp, to explore this idea of engagement with the Western world, even when they have their candidate in place from August onwards. So there's a lot of discussion going on right now in Tehran about whether this is something we should do now or whether we should hold off and do it later. And much like actually the Republicans in the US, the thinking is the moderates will never be the ones to overturn a deal or pose a threat to a deal that a hardliner in Iran has agreed to. Unlike the flip side, which is that if you have a moderate that comes to the agreement, then the hardliners, much like the Republicans in the US, will not hesitate to either pull out or ruin the deal or whatever it is. So again, there is a lot of debate going on internally about whether it's worth doing this now or later. I think so far they haven't come to an agreement. I think a lot of that will depend on how the discussions go today and if they're able to make any progress. And if you have a certain momentum with the way things are moving forward, then I think they'll stay on it and they'll pursue it and they'll see what happens. If the discussions today and over the course of the next couple of days fail, I think the Supreme Leader will eventually make a decision to hold off until after the elections. So this is a very big overview of where things sit in Tehran, and I'm happy to answer questions more specifically, but I will just add that the problem with this entire process is that in Iran right now, discussions of the zone and the pursuit of the Middle East WMD free zone is very, very low on their list of priorities because of everything that's happened with the JCPOA. And the discussions on any future zone, again, in my opinion, will be on a freeze until you've had a return to the JCPOA and potentially an expansion of the dialogue on the JCPOA 2.0 or whatever you want to call it. And only then will you be able to get some traction with officials in Iran about, perhaps making a little bit of a move on the zone. Until then, I think, unfortunately, things are going to be stuck. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dina. That was an excellent, comprehensive skate over what's going on in the mines within Iran. Let me ask the first question. There are a number starting to pick up, but let me ask the first question on that last observation that you made, because it's always struck me that the zone is an opportunity for Iran to demonstrate that constraint on nuclear activities and other sensitive activities needs to be handled at a regional level rather than just targeted on Iran. Why is it that Iran doesn't make more of that and say, look, this is something that we're accepting constraints on, our neighbours need to do the same, and the effective way of doing this is a regional conversation on the zone?
I think they understand that, particularly those who are the nuclear wonks or the WMD wonks within the Iranian system. They really do understand that perspective. The problem is, I think they're very pragmatic and they're quite realist, and also their resources have been stretched thin. So the majority of their focus is right now this JCPOA problem. And then you have a range of other issues that come in that kind of push the zone idea at the bottom of the list of priorities, really. And in terms of convincing their interlocutors, whether regionally or internationally, that the zone should be the way to approach it, I think that given their perspective on the whole, if we have the entire Middle East in a zone, the discomfort with the Israelis being part of it, the process, but at the same time wanting to make them part of the process because of their nuclear arsenal, there are just too many conflicting issues on making this happen. And then they also, I think, they see their immediate region as being unwilling to take part in this. So they feel like if they put a lot of effort into the PR campaign of convincing everybody that this is the way forward, it's kind of going to fall on deaf ears, which is why I think they're focusing most of their efforts, on the JCPOA front and also on the regional front, but not on the zone, more on we need to have a dialogue on de-escalation and regional security to begin with, and then we can address everything that comes as a result of that.